then we'll open up for questions later on.
Yep.
So I would like to introduce Michelle Hoole, who works at a specialist school, and she'll talk through her background. But Michelle and her school reached out to us as part of the DFE EdTech Demonstrator Schools and Colleges program, just to have a chat around how they were using Microsoft Teams in their environment. And it was very much a coaching conversation that we had, and they were doing some really good things, but we did discuss some areas where improvements could be made. But also I learned a lot from Michelle too, so I hope that you will learn something in this 40 to 45 minutes, 50-minute session, and have some questions from Michelle at the end. So as usual, for those who've been listening to me for the past 2 days, thank you very much, Michelle, and I'll back out now and hand over to you.
Right, thank you. All right, I'm not used to Google Meet, so I will just see if it'll let me. In fact, if I present to a thing, right, I'll do it that way. Right. Right, can everyone see that presentation? Is that okay?
Yeah,
thumbs up. Thank you. Brilliant. Okay, so my name's Michelle. I work at Lighthouse School in Leeds, and we were actually one of the very first free secondary special schools back in 2012. So we've not been open a really long time. In fact, last year was the kind of first year our students had started in year 7 actually graduated and moved on from year 14. So we've not been open very long. Our school is an old hospital in Leeds that was built in, I think, the late 1800s, and the whole inside's been designed to be very bespoke for our students. All our students have a diagnosis of autism, and that's really the one thing they do have in common. But we have an absolute range of abilities. So we do have students who are following what we call a livability curriculum, and we also have students. We had a student last year who left our school and has gone on to Leeds Art University to study there. So we have a real range of students, and within each group we try and group them according to key stage and ability, but obviously within each group there's quite a wide range. But we are a small school. We have 81 students. Our classes are about 9, but I say they are a real range. So my background is, my degree's in computer science, and I've ended up working for the school since 2013, and I'm also a Key Stage 4 coordinator, which is like head of Key Stage 4, and I teach all the computing lessons in the school. So I'm kind of the geekiest person, so I tend to do all the stuff, the techie stuff first, and then we sort of share it out to staff afterwards. So the reason we're using, I mean, it's not a full learning platform, but the reason we're using more of a digital solution is we believe that it's a great way of preparing our students for college and university. The more practice our students have for trying things like that, the better it is for them. Our students do struggle to generalize knowledge, so the more opportunities they have to practice things like that, the better for them. It's a great way to have a central place to store work and track marks, so we're not having to use, a student shared area, getting onto student work, trying to find things, having students trying to find where they've saved things. Reduces paper by an absolute ton and saves printing costs. So for this year, I've gone 100% digital for work. So that has reduced a lot of things there. Very helpful in our current environment. It's much easier to differentiate and scaffold work. I'm not trying to work out which piece of paper I'm giving to which student, or telling them which file that they have to open, or you're on version 1, and this other student needs to be on version 2. And the nice thing is they're not always aware that it's fully differentiated for them. So they can have the scaffolding without feeling that they're not getting stretched and challenged appropriately. And we can always we can also use it for remote as well as in-person lessons, which is what I've been doing. So I tend to teach when we've been in lockdown asynchronously rather than doing live lessons, and students who've been isolating have still been able to access all the work if they've been at home. And actually for a week, I was isolating for a couple of days. So I was kind of teaching from home and they still could access. So we had somebody with support and I was there for students if they needed me. So I'm just going to go a bit through the journey that I've had, sort of when we started using Teams, when we started properly using it, which was last year, and sort of how we've got to where we are. So in 2019 and 20, I started introducing Teams mainly. To be honest, we had Office 365 and it was part of it. So it was free. Our students were using, our school uses Office 365 for emails. So I thought, well, why not use it? It's going to make my life a bit easier than trying to set up Google Classroom and talk to our technicians and get all that sorted. I used assignments mainly and provided files for students to work on. So I would create like a Word document that I would attach so they didn't have to necessarily upload work, especially some of our students who would struggle with that. I used quizzes loads. I used Microsoft Forms an awful lot. And I did try OneNote last year, but I had real problems. I would create these wonderful OneNote pages and then distribute the pages, and then it never worked on our network. So we'd have half the students having the file and then I'd have to try and redistribute it in the lesson. So I kind of binned that at the time and focused mainly on a very basic setup, really, using assignments. So students would have the work that was appropriately scaffolded, and then they would complete the work online, either using PowerPoint or Microsoft Word for a lot of things, using other platforms for programming, and then would submit, and then I could mark it and give them feedback. But the one thing we did use OneNote for was the collaboration area, where we could actually get students, they'd present their work and then they'd create a feedback form that they would embed into a OneNote page and then get feedback from each other. And students really liked that. Students really quickly adapted to using Teams. I'm very strong with routines for our students. So we always did it in the same order at the beginning of the lesson, and it would have the instructions at the beginning of the presentation. So, log on to your computer, log on to Teams, go to the appropriate team, log in with your, go to the assignment, and so on. So I used to always do it that way, and students very quickly remembered the routine, and so it made it a lot easier for them. And obviously that's how I ran it for the most of 2019-20 until about March, and then we went into lockdown. So then we were having to look at doing remote learning, and other staff we were using email a lot. I continued to use Teams. I was doing a lot of programming, and it was trying to find a way that students could access understanding of programming. And so I used a lot of make code, because you can actually add a make code file, a blank make code file for students. So we did an awful lot of making games using virtual microbits, and that went down really well. And the nice thing now is that when it first started out, it was mostly blocks and JavaScript, and I teach Python because I think Python is a much better starting language for students, because it gives them the best habits. It's a really nice, clean language. It reads almost like English. But now MakeCode, I think for every single version of MakeCode now, you can show Python. So we did that. I used a lot of Microsoft Streams at this point. So I did a lot of screen recording, and then I would add a video. So at home they could watch a video. I often did like a video on how to make a particular aspect of a game. And I did like short activities over the week, and then built up to like a bigger project that they could do as their big piece of work. And then the other thing that I added was called the Insight app. And the Insight app is brilliant because it shows how long students are accessing the work. So you can quickly see which students were accessing, which students weren't accessing the work, and how long they were spending on each activity. So I found that really helpful. And as we went through lockdown, more and more staff started to use them. Some students even had individual teams where they could have more well-being work with our well-being tutors, so more support around their well-being, where it was like a safe place that they could talk with staff without other students seeing it. So they had that kind of continued support out, you know, a little bit more live than just sending emails, and students really liked that. So we got a lot of engagement with that. And as I say, it was really easy to track engagement, which is much more difficult to do if you're emailing work. You couldn't really see how long a student had spent on the work, but this way they could easily do the work. I could see they'd made mistakes, I could see issues, and I could use that to plan for the next session and for the next piece of work. So I could easily kind of catch misconceptions, even if they were working at home and I was working at home. So we found that much more successful. And on the back of that, obviously now we've come into September, how it's working now is we're having to be really careful about the use of paper, sharing resources. Students are staying in one classroom and staff are moving around. And I thought, for my well-being as well, that if I could have everything digital, it would save me carrying loads of things about. I could easily access student work wherever I was. So even if I had like 10 minutes, I could look at 1 or 2 students' work. So I could like keep on top of my marking a lot easier. I reintroduced OneNote because I found that if you assign a page rather than distributing it, so if you assign the OneNote page as part of the assignment, that worked really effectively. And again, yeah, paper free. And the great thing about OneNote is because it saved it in their OneNote notebook, I was actually able to create like revision resources for students, because we've introduced GCSE computing this year. And my biggest worry for our students is, because it's a 2-year linear course, there's an exam in 2 years. I'm really passionate with our students around helping to support their retention of information and also their cognitive load, because our students, it's a particular area of weakness for a lot of our students, a lot down to their diagnosis of autism. So anything I can do to help students revise, anything I can help to have them access videos, quizzes. And the other thing is a website called repl.it. You can embed Python programs into the OneNote page, so they can actually see the code, run the code, and we can work on things like that together. So that's worked really well. I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of how I've used OneNote. The one thing that I wasn't doing initially was organizing the OneNote pages for the students, which I have done now. So the students have the topics as sections in their OneNote, and then what I do is I create the OneNote page which has information for them plus activities. So you can see there we did logic gates, so I've done a lot of graphics on that, trying to use appropriate metaphors for students to kind of really understand a fairly abstract and quite difficult topic. I've used a range of programming websites. Trinket is really good because they have like a blocks based one, and then if you see on the third, so that's the iteration one, if you see there where it's on the selection screenshot, that's actually REPL code, so they can actually see the code and they can predict what's going to happen. Then they can actually run it, and then when they can click on it, they can go into their REPL account and fork the code and then edit it. And then what they do is they paste new links for me. So I'm always giving them a starting point in programming. Having some code to start off is a really great way for students to learn programming. It reduces their cognitive load. You can get right into the part that you really want to teach them, so they understand that concept without having them either copy a load of code where there could be errors and frustrations, or they're having to try and think of an entire program. So you can sort of set them up really well. If you look at the middle screenshot, you'll see there's 2 asterisks there. It's a bit of a way I've been differentiating work. So it just helps for my brain. So for example, if I've differentiated a worksheet, 1 asterisk will be one that has the most scaffolding, and 3 asterisks will be the one that has the least. So for a student I may be looking at them potentially getting a 7+ grade at GCSE. So I'm really wanting them to stretch. So they'll get additional challenges. They'll get much less scaffolding. They won't use the blocks as much. They'll be doing a lot more coding and looking at pseudocode. With students who need additional support, we'll get much more visual, a lot more scaffolding, and less code to worry about, because I'm focusing on them understanding the concepts as well. So I do that a lot. So for our students, I'm generally differentiating in a class of 9 4 ways, 5 ways sometimes. Sometimes a student might have a completely bespoke lesson, but I can do that quite easily in OneNote by creating a resource, then duplicating that resource, adding the scaffolding, and then assigning it to the particular students. And the student, when they're working on it, they don't know they're getting necessarily anything different. So, you know, it protects their sort of self-worth and well-being, but they're getting an appropriate challenge. So they're not like put off by it. So they still are really engaged and feeling really successful and really enjoying the work. So that's where we're kind of up to now at this half term. I've got every single student using Teams, including students who are working significantly below like year 1. They're actually been able to access it. I've got one student whose main target this year is practicing typing just a single letter to identify letters on a keyboard, and we're doing that through Teams, supported by a member of staff, but we've got all the evidence of her work in one place, which has really helped. We've also got students who are working on entry-level functional skills in ICT, but using Teams and doing that really successfully. And for us, the thing that we're trialing now is that we try and reduce the amount of marking for our students, because reading feedback and then applying it doesn't really work very well for our students. Our students it works much better if they can have feedback in the moment. So how our school works at the last year's, we used to have what was called a conference session, where you'd have like one-to-one time with a student, go through, make sure that they understand the things that they've been doing, and given appropriate challenges for their next steps. Obviously, I can't do that now because I can't be that close to students. So what we're trialing now is using OneNote. So it's a little asynchronous. So I've been trialing it this week. So I sort of turn I take my computer off the screen. They're working on OneNote, and I can jump into their OneNote file and have those conversations with them. So I can kind of type in any questions they can answer. I can quickly see if they're understanding it. I can add extra questions, extension that way. We're going to be looking at training some staff and sharing tips and tricks. There's other staff that are now, especially with OneNote, it's being used a lot in a politics session that a member of staff's teaching, sort of entry level and GCSE politics, and he's using OneNote extensively. And I'm going to start looking at maybe some other Office 365 apps, such as Sway, for students to be able to create engaging content, you know, beyond PowerPoint, so that they have a little bit more of engagement, and using Whiteboard for more collaborative work, where we can do a bit more of our kind of group discussions and group work, socially distanced, which is the bit that we're obviously can't do a right lot of at the moment. And finally, I have a final slide before any questions. I just realised I've whizzed through this a bit, but I will share this presentation out. As I say, I use asterisks for differentiation in assignment name, so students don't really notice it, but it's really clear for you and any support staff. So if a member of staff, if they see that student's on a 1-star, they know that they've got more scaffolding. I tend to add instructions into a file if they're working on it. So for example, in an assignment, there is a section where you can put a description of the assignment. for our students and for students who do have trouble processing instructions, once they then move to the file, they will forget a lot of that information. So I will tend to put that information in the file as well, because that's reducing their cognitive load and really getting them an opportunity to actually do the work you want, rather than having to try and remember 3 or 4 instructions. If you have students who've got a diagnosis of autism or ADHD, or have got any students who are neurodivergent, that really does help. We've thought a lot with their work around the layout of like the OneNote files, using appropriate images and the design to again support the cognitive load, and to use like dual coding. We've been looking into using appropriate imagery, but also focus on the layout of your OneNote files. If everything's scattered around and not following a straightforward structure, students can get quite confused. I tend to be very, very structured in the work that I give them, so that they always kind of know what to expect at the next point, so they're not having to think about that. That's not adding any additional stress. One thing that I've always done, even if a student isn't in, I will always return all the work in assignments, because otherwise they tend to hang around, and that really affects my my cognitive load, and it causes a lot of visual clutter for me. So when I finish marking, even if a student's absent, I return everything, because then I know that I've done my marking, I've seen all the work. The other thing I would say is, if you're going to try a new feature, always trial it with confident staff and students before rolling it out and rolling out training, because it does need to be trialed before you kind of want to roll anything out, because there can be lots of gotchas. As I say, I spent a very frustrating couple of months in the beginning of September 2019 to the beginning of 2020 with one notebook. And I think if we'd have rolled that out at that time with staff, we'd have probably put them off it completely. Now we found a way that consistently works well. We can start showing staff that actually this is a really good feature. But if we'd have tried to do it then, they would have had a couple of lessons where it'd have gone wrong, and they wouldn't have really wanted to do it again, especially if they're less IT confident. So, you know, always make sure that your staff who can cope with these inevitable techie problems at first, and find all the problems, and students as well. And the last thing I would say is always get feedback, particularly the students. Students will often tell you what's wrong with, you know, what they're struggling with, and you can find, you know, ways of changing how you're presenting stuff. So, for example, when I started out, I'd put a lot of instructions in the assignment part of the team's assignment, and students really struggled with that, struggled with remembering what they had to do in the lesson. So now I've not got any pieces of paper for them. They have it in there. They have it in the file, so they already know what they're doing. So I say, yeah, I'm from Lighthouse School. I say all my students, we're 11 to 19. All our students have a diagnosis of autism, but are not, as I say, we don't necessarily have students who you would see always at particularly a special school. We have students who've been in mainstream and have really struggled there. So are academically potentially quite able, so potentially on track to get good GCSE grades, but have really struggled in a mainstream environment. And as I say, we're set up very much so to support students who struggle with that. So we have the full range. I will teach students on the LP levels one lesson, and then who are on track to get very high GCSE grades on the next lesson. You know, I love that. It's been a real challenge for my practice. My background was very much secondary mainstream. I've had to learn a lot, but I found that technology, I think, works particularly well with our students if it's structured correctly. Well, that's all I've got to say. So I'll send the presentation out, but I'm absolutely happy to take any questions or any comments, especially if anybody else has been using Teams. I'm always up for learning any new tricks.
I think some people are waiting in the lobby. I've just had a message saying they can't get in.
I've not had any notification of anybody waiting.
Yeah. And Nadia sent me a message saying she's been waiting to be let in, but it's just not doing anything.
I think I've just let a Nadia in, actually.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
Nadia,
I say I will send the presentation out. I'll be PDFing it, and I'll send it. I'll send it to Wayne to be able to send out to everybody.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was interesting.
I just wanted to say thanks for that. I thought that was a superb presentation, and a lot of parallels there. I've also got a computer science background, and my daughter attends a specialist school for autism. So I think perhaps you and I should be best friends.
Yeah.
No, really good to hear some of the you mentioned about embedding make code into teams. That's something I'll be kind of promoting a bit more with our computing team, who are, like I said, primarily Google at the moment, but I think there's quite a number of things that they're missing out on by just looking at Google at the moment. So I think that was one of the things that I took away that I'd be promoting to them.
Yeah, Make Code Arcade. The kids will absolutely love it. You can also, post-COVID, you can actually buy quite cheaply little game devices that will play Make Code Arcade files. So you could actually get them making games and the proper games, and then putting them onto devices so they could actually play them with their friends and things like that, it's a great deal of fun. Our kids love it.
That's excellent. Thanks for that. That sounds superb.
Yeah.
Anybody else got any questions for Michelle?
I think it's been a long couple of days, hasn't it? And there'll be quite a few probably raring to get to half term.
Well, I'll tell you what, Michelle, you had a really good turnout there compared to some of the other sessions. So for this time on a Friday night, heading into a half term, I think you had a really good turnout there, and your presentation was really good, and I'm really pleased with how your school has developed that use. And I know we did have that conversation around class notebook and how it does take that time to develop it. It takes that you need to get used to Teams before you can start using class notebook.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm finding more and more that it's so I did a feedback session with my GCSE students this week, and then I showed them where all the files were that they were working on for the last 7 weeks, and their just faces lit up, and it was like, oh, my notes here. And it's like, yeah, all the work you've done, everything, all your revision notes are all here. And because it was so much more interactive, I think they've remembered an awful lot more. And I say quizzes are just so easy to set through Teams, through Microsoft Forms. I think, as I say, I think Microsoft have really caught up. We also, as my other role is a Key Stage coordinator, we actually have a Key Stage 4 team for staff. So we use that as a way, because obviously we can't stay in school for a full day anymore. We have to leave to make sure the cleaners can come in and clean properly. So we have meetings in there. All our meeting notes are on there, so staff we can communicate together, so we still feel like we're a team. So we found that very helpful. And for subjects where more than one teacher has been teaching it, a team has been really helpful for that, where we can just sort of discuss away from the students, and we can discuss things. And yeah, we're using it more and more. We found it really helpful. We even have our staff briefings now are done on Microsoft Stream and then sent out. So our head teacher does a video briefing that we can all watch on a morning, or whenever we've got time on a Monday. So it keeps us together, which is good.
Good, yeah. It's very much about building that community and maintaining that.
Yeah, and finding ways of doing it. Yeah.
If I could jump in, I was just going to mention I came into Class Notebook before I did with Teams, so I have been teaching with it for 3 years.
Oh wow!
And one of the things that we actually find very useful is that, because you can work with other teachers, but also with the support teams. I mean, I work in FE, so it's mainstream, but we often have got students with exam concessions or within the spectrum, and they find really useful the fact that they can see the work from the students. Also, when we all went into lockdown with teams, they could have those conversations, because we allowed private chat between student and staff. So you can easily target students using insights, as you mentioned earlier. Yeah. And one thing that I popped into the chat is also that we have started to use Sways, because one of our English teachers, he worked out how to use Sways that as a template to give to students, and then they work through the work, because we are integrating forms, we're integrating different tasks in the Sway. So really, teams can work as a hub where you are integrating all the work. And just the easy reminder that my students, the same issue, Miss, I cannot find the work. Everything within Microsoft really will generate a hyperlink. So often I just tend to go and say, right, here's the link. There you go. So it's becoming more and more accessible as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for putting that link in. I'll definitely be looking at that, because as I say, Sway is my next thing. I only used Sway over lockdown. I made digital birthday cards for all my students. So when it was their birthday, because otherwise we'd miss it. So they all got a birthday card. So, but I haven't really looked too much in Sway, and I know that's next on my list to trial over half term to have a play with that. So
Sway can be a game changer for something.
Yeah, I think so. I think if it gets people a bit away from PowerPoint and gives them a bit more engagement, that'll be really fun.
Okay, if nobody's got any more questions or comments for Michelle, then I think we'll wrap this up, and we'll wrap up the festival. I think we've had 2 really, really full days with some really fantastic speakers, and I think there's not been one session that I haven't learned something in. And I know there's lots and lots of positive comments have come from every single one of the sessions. So what I will be doing is, over the next week or 2, I'll be organising all of the recordings. I'll put all the recordings out onto our website so that you can have a look at those. And then any of the presentations, I'll also place those on the site so that you can grab those as well. So I just want to say thank you very much for making this such a success over the 2 days. Yesterday morning I was frantically rushing around trying to manage all sorts of tech problems, but today's gone really, really smooth, and I'd just like to say thank you very much, and especially to our speakers for joining us over the past 2 days. So see you again next year, and go and enjoy your bank holiday.
Yeah, I've just popped my email in the chat, but I'll pop it on the end of the presentation as well. So if you ever want to come chat to me about anything like that, or if you've got anything you want to kind of collaborate, I'm always up for that.
Lovely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Right, thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for everything. Bye-bye.